صوتك يا شعبي أغنية تمضي تخفو في بيت تستيقظ في بيت لحن لا يذوي. صوتك يا شعبي ينبت سوسنة في الصخر. صوتك يا شعبي لحن لا يذوي ينبت سوسنة في الصخر. صوتك يا شعبي لحن لا يذوي ينبت سوسنة في الصخر. مهما طال عمر الليل حتما سنغزل منه خيوط الشمس. انفض يا شعبي ركام الموت. حي يا شعبي حي أنت. انفض يا شعبي ركام الموت. حي يا شعبي حي أنت.
لن تكسروا أعناقنا، لن تهزموا أشواقنا، نحن القضاء المبرم.
Esa proclama es patria o muerte.
Our primary task remains to unite our people.
إننا لمنتصرون لأن إرادتنا من إرادة الله وإرادة الله لا تقرر.
حي يا شعبي يا شعبي حي يا شعبي حي أنت.
يدك المرفوعة في وجه الظالم قاومت قاوم قاوم قاوم.
يدك المرفوعة في وجه الظالم قاومت قاوم قاوم قاوم.
حي يا شعبي يا شعبي حي حي يا شعبي حي حي أنت.
يدك المرفوعة في وجه الظالم قاومت قاوم قاوم قاوم.
يدك المرفوعة في وجه الظالم قاومت قاوم قاوم قاوم. حي يا شعبي
يا شعبي يا شعبي.
What a beautiful and inspiring video to start us all off with resistance. Marhaba, everybody. Thank you for attending Al-Awda's Land Day commemoration, which also falls on Easter weekend. And we wish you all a happy Easter. which we know is a very important holiday for all Palestinians. My grandmother, who passed away recently, Allah yarhamha, used to tell me stories of Easter egg hunts in their Muslim village of Beit Iksa before the Nakba in 1948. I'm honored to welcome you all and start us off today. My name is Nerdeen Kiswani, and I'm a member of Al-Awda and a founder of Within Our Lifetime. Wool has been working on several important projects in coordination with Al-Awda, New York, and national to provide resources and support to develop youth leadership. Right now, actually, we're dedicating a great deal of time and energy strategizing to preempt repressive and dangerous Zionist tactics on campuses, including the adoption of IRA. Through my position on student government as the CUNY Law delegate for the University Student Senate, which represents 500,000 students in undergraduate and graduate schools in New York, I pushed to table a vote to adopt IRA. And we've been working heavily with Jewish Law Students Association and the Misik from Al-Awda, New York, playing a critical role in the strategic and legal aspect of this. And we look forward to coordinating with more youth and students from across the country who would like to join in on these efforts. I want to start us off with a quote from Frantz Fanon, who said, "For a colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread, and above all, dignity." This is why for Palestinians, Land Day embodies the history of our people's struggle in defense of our land and our struggle to return to it. From March 30th, 1976, when 6 Palestinians were shot and killed by occupation forces while resisting the illegal theft of Palestinian lands in Al-Jalil, to March 30th, 2018, when tens of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza marched on the eastern border with the occupation, demanding the right to return, and Israeli forces responded by raining down tear gas and toxic chemicals, and snipers murdered 15 Palestinians in cold blood on the first day alone. And while many turn focus to vaccine access in mainstream media or lack thereof in Palestine, Palestinians cannot adequately access medical care, resources, or sufficient infrastructure in a crisis because Palestine, Gaza, the West Bank, 48, and surrounding refugee camps have been in crisis since the colonization of our land. And whether the occupying power provides vaccines as required under international law is irrelevant if Palestinians actually had access to our own land and resources, because Palestinians have had no shortage of creative methods to innovate in the face of severe adversity brought upon by Israeli colonization and war crimes. We would not need Israeli vaccines or US aid if we were able to build up our society. What we need is Israel to stop destroying our homes and hospitals and assassinating our scientists, nurses, medical workers, and our people. Today, we honor and echo the call to commemorate the anniversary of Land Day and the Great Return March by honoring those who were martyred while trying to return, and by recommitting ourselves to prioritizing the implementation of the basic right of Palestinians to return safely and immediately to their original homes and land. And as we honor our martyrs and recommit to the land, we must also recommit to working towards our liberation. The labor with and for our communities beyond the virtual, the labor that connects us to our lands. And land is not rhetorical. As Khalid once said, boycotts are effective, but that does not liberate land. And we owe this work to our struggle and those who have worked so diligently before us to ensure our national struggle is alive. We need to be organized. Our resistance works best when we do so on every level of society, and we have to join organizations and serve our communities in every neighborhood, from New York to Palestine. We must resist and support resistance by any means necessary, as resistance is the embodiment of defending and returning to our land. From resisting Zionist repression on campuses to resisting Israel as an entity and supporting those resisting, from Ahad al-Tamimi to Basil al-Araj. Al-Awda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, is commemorating Land Day with a discussion today of the struggles taking place to defend Palestinian land and lives and the struggle for liberation and return. We're honored to have a film screening today of Hummus, A Story of Appropriation, with a discussion featuring the director, Lafi, Abood, and an amazing program of speakers in the following order. Khalid Hijazi, Suhair Nafal, Noura Erekat, Mohammed El-Kurd, Lafi Abood, and Samir Hussam. I'm excited to turn it over to Khalid Hijazi, board member of Al-Awda National, who is giving a word commemorating the 45th anniversary of Land Day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nerdeen. And I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to thank all of our panelists, for giving time to share their work, in this event. And I wanted to thank all of you who are participating, and I'm hoping that this event will be worthy of your time. In my segment, I think I'm giving like 10 minutes. What I'm going to do, I want to give a historical context to Land Day and also briefly identify it. So Land Day, or Yawm al-Ard, is an important day for us Palestinians and for us at Al-Awda, as it renews our call, commitment, and energy to fight for the most important factor of our struggle, our land, the land of Palestine, from the river to the sea, the land of our forefathers from time immemorial, and for the Palestinian people who were forcibly and unjustly removed from it to be fully repatriated and restituted. The event of Land Day, also known as the Galilee Revolt, took place on March 30th, 1976. On that day, Palestinian citizens of the newly formed settler colonial state of so-called Israel finally mustered the energy and broke their fear and silence. They collectively, the Palestinians inside the Green Line, went on a general strike and took to the streets, protesting a renewed effort by the Zionist state of Israel in expropriating and appropriating more land. Israeli police force violently charged the demonstrators, killing 6 young Palestinians and maiming and detaining hundreds of them. Though the strike itself was a response to a policy by Israel at the time to confiscate 21,000 dunums of land in the upper Galilee region of Palestine, Palestinians were in actuality protesting and revolting against a new reality that had been exacted upon them ever since the events of the Nakba of 1948. So just to list a few of these new forced realities since 1948. So right after 1948, around 500 villages, towns, cities were razed to the ground. Of course, 800, the majority of the Palestinian people, 850,000 Palestinians were forcibly deported. Palestinians in major cities were massacred or deported. This caused the disappearance of the middle class. No more publishing houses, no more newspapers, magazines, or books published in Arabic, and hardly anyone able to write and articulate the pain and agonies of their daily lives. Literary people such as Mahmoud Darwish, Saliba Khamis, Samih Al-Qasim, Tawfiq Zayyad were detained or placed under house arrest in order to prevent them from writing. About 1/3 of the Palestinians who remained within the Green Line became internal refugees, close to 400,000 in today's numbers. Continuous land appropriation on a massive scale, and over 25 laws enabled these policies. Palestinians were placed under military administration or curfew laws from 1948 up to 1966. For this reason, Palestinians realized the real ambitions of the colonial state of Israel. Basically, it was to exterminate them, a carefully planned act of genocide to completely remove them from their land. And if they have to succumb and relent to the wishes of their colonizers, they will cease to exist. So the Land Day plays an important, a lot of significant points in our memory for us as Palestinians. For instance, Land Day marked a turning point as the first effective mass mobilization by Palestinians within Israel against internal colonialism and land theft. It unified Palestinians from inside the Green Line with their brothers and sisters in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and in exile, and marked a point of departure, a renewed sense of awareness of the land. And of course, Land Day is still relevant because the Zionist state of so-called Israel continues to steal land until this day and age. And of course, Sheikh Jarrah today, is a good example of that. It is also important to note that that as we commemorate this day in 1976, in the same year, Palestinians in Lebanon, alongside their Lebanese brethren and other comrades from all over the world, were engaged in a universal fight against neoliberalism, imperialism, and capitalism. By March 30th of that year, 1976, Palestinians in Lebanon had sustained massacres upon massacres on the hands of the isolationists and reactionary forces of the right. Last but not least, Land Day is centered around our goals and actions as Al-Awda, as our essential goal is to remain aware of the land that was stolen from us and the dream that we have that one day our Palestinian refugees will one day return to their land. And I'm just going to end this by reading a very short poem by Tawfiq Zayad on Land Day. And I'm going to read it in Arabic. And he says here, كأننا 20 مستحيل في اللد والرملة والجليل هنا على صدوركم باقون كالجدار وفي حلوقكم كقطعة الزجاج كالصبار وفي عيونكم زوبعة من نار. And this, as it translates into English, as if we were 20 impossibilities in Lid, Ramli, and Galilee, here on your chests, staying like a wall, and in your throats like a piece of glass, like a cactus, and in your eyes a whirlwind of fire. So this is my the next item that I have in my segment is on a happier note. Basically, is that we are today celebrating some of the work and the cases that have been won by some of our Palestinian activists in America, such as the case of Rabab Abdel Hadi and the case of Suhair Nafal. And before I turn to Suhair, and this is as a segue to Suhair's story, and like what Nerdeen mentioned, that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip took this activity of the Great March of Return, and Israelis, of course, killed hundreds of Palestinians, and one of the people who they killed was Rozdan Najjar. So Suhair Nafal, who is a Palestinian American born in Jordan and grew up in San Francisco for most of her life, where she had a career in corporate America. So after witnessing, the 2014 50 days of Israeli massacre on Gaza, she felt compelled to join the world in social media activism to bring worldwide awareness to human rights violations and social injustices, with an emphasis on Palestine. So what Suhair did at that time, from the Right of Return March, she posted a picture of young Rozdan Najjar, and right after that, pro-Israeli Zionists wanted to intimidate and silence Suhair, so they took her to court. And fortunately, and this almost broke precedence, that Suhair won her case. So I think we have Suhair with us, and Suhair, I welcome you to our event. And if you can tell us, if you can shed some light on the case, and tell us what is your takeout from the whole story that you encountered. Is Suhair with us?
Sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Like everybody else in the world, I was horrified and just heartbroken to see young Razan Najjar sniped in the middle of the field during that protest. And I was posting about it, as everybody was, on social media. And I also, at that moment, saw a post come down of a young American gal who had joined the Israeli army. That the IDF page, the Facebook page of the IDF, was sort of bragging about her, you know, highlighting how she left the United States to go and join the army, the Israeli army. And so immediately, all I can think of is this young girl's choice, like that she left the United States to join an organization that is basically involved in policies of ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, versus Razan, whose choice of a career is to save the lives of fellow Palestinians as a nurse and as a healer. And so I put both pictures together of them, and I basically compared the two. Unfortunately, my readers didn't read my wording correctly and changed my wording, and it went viral that I had stated that it was this young American gal who assassinated Razan. 2.5 years later, I come home and I'm handed a $6 million lawsuit for defamation of this young American gal who's no longer with the IDF. So needless to say, it was a little bit of a shocker, but not really. 6 months later, thankfully, between having an amazing attorney and a great judge who is a principled man, he made the choice to obviously dismiss the case because it was ridiculous, and also punish them and essentially make the plaintiff pay me my attorney's fees, which was a very bold and powerful statement, showing that as the Israeli law firm that joined this young gal, Shurat Hadin, they're known for intimidation tactics and basically trying to silence anybody who speaks up against Israel. You know, when the judgment came through, I was in a way conflicted as well as I was thankful. I was conflicted that here is this country that I live in, that I love, who is complicit in financially aiding the so-called state of Israel in essentially ethnic cleansing my people. And yet this very country, this state that I live in, protected me from a very powerful group that wanted to destroy my life. And so for the first time in a long time, I felt very grateful to be American, and I felt very grateful that I got to exercise my First Amendment rights and have them be protected. So it was a beautiful feeling in that regard. Also, I joined activism late. I just came on in 2014. I was raised by a mother who was an activist. I know what activism does to people. It's a hard job emotionally, but I wanted to get into activism, and I felt social media was a great tool for me because it's a wonderful platform to bring awareness to everything that needs to be, the information that needs to be brought about Palestine. But for a while, I started getting burned out. For a while, I just thought, you know what? I don't know if I want to continue to do this. It's too difficult. And emotionally, it takes a toll on many people, as we know. But winning this lawsuit and having it be dismissed in the way it was dismissed more than reinvigorated me. It renewed my love and my passion for what I want to do for the rest of my life, more so than ever. And you know, there are so many people on social media who look over their shoulders, who post certain things about the atrocities that are happening in Israel, but keep certain details out because they're afraid of being blocked, or they're afraid of being fired, or they're afraid of being judged. I hope this win and this victory convinces them that that's not the case. We are now in a position where speaking up against Israel, speaking up against their atrocities is the norm. It is accepted, and it is it has to happen. It has to continue, and we have to keep speaking up, whether on social media or off social media. And so my message to everybody is don't be afraid. Keep posting, keep exposing, keep sharing. I've got a good attorney. God forbid you get sued. We got some amazing attorneys in our movement that are going to protect us and fight for us. So I'm extremely pleased and very grateful for everybody's support.
Thank you very much, Suhair. And definitely we are so proud of you. You are resilient, courageous, and really a brilliant activist. A lot of people listen to you, and you are making a difference, and we really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I'm honored. Thank you, Habibi.
Thanks. Yeah. So the next item that I have is, as all of you know, for us Al-Awda, we connect directly with our refugees in exile. So one of our, what we've done last year is that we've raised money to help Palestinians in the refugee camps in Lebanon. And as all of you know, the extreme dire case that Palestinians are experiencing, especially throughout COVID and with the economic crisis in Lebanon. So we are doing the same thing. We're doing a fundraising. And I think if we're supposed to have a slide on Zoom. So if you can, basically we're asking, any of us, if you can help contribute to our fundraising event that is going to start soon, especially the month of Ramadan. And if you can help us with this, we are very appreciative of that. So our next segment. Thank you. So our next segment, and here really I am honored to introduce to all of you Noura, Erekat, our very articulate Palestinian activist and academic. So Noura Erekat is a human rights attorney and assistant professor at Rutgers University. She has served as legal counsel to the US House of Representatives and as a legal advocate for Palestinian refugee rights at the United Nations. Noura's research interests include human rights and humanitarian, refugee, and national security law. She is a frequent commentator with recent appearances on CBS News, CNN, Fox News, and NPR, among others. And her writings have been widely published in the national media and academic journals. And of course, we are proud and honored that also Noura is appearing with our activity at Al-Awda. So here, without further ado, I welcome Noura Erekat.
تسلم خالد, تسلمي أماني ونردين ويعطيكم العافية. It's an honor to be here. Obviously, I was nurtured as an activist and a political thinker in the throes of Al-Awda, in the streets of New York, which was my first trip to the East Coast even, and so it's an honor to be back here. I want to emphasize that in the course of this talk, that as we are resisting an apartheid state that basically uses apartheid as a governmental form in order to consolidate its colonial takings. It is a settler colony, that we too live in a settler colony. And though we may not have come with the intent to settle, we are settlers vis-a-vis the native nations on these lands on which we stand. And so I want to, lift that up and also say that the contradictions that we live in the United States, that it remains an imperial power that is, as Suhair clearly said, that is facilitating our ethnic cleansing, but so too is it obfuscating an ethnic cleansing on these lands that we have a responsibility to protect. And indeed, I think that Suhair, your case is exceptional as was the recent case dismissed against the US Campaign for Palestinian Equal Rights by, you were lifting up attorneys, I'm gonna lift up Diala Shammas, who represented them in that defense case, but not everybody has been as fortunate, as we know from the cases of Sami Al-Aryan, as we know from the case of Stephen Salaita and others. We are living in contradictions and exceptions, and that should not at all mitigate our move to resist. And so I'm so delighted to be here with folks who I've resisted with and continue to resist with, and I'm now newly resisting with, as with Mohammed El-Kurd, who I've only recently increased our activism. Before him, I knew his family and had visited Sheikh Jarrah with delegations many times before. So this is really an honor and speaks to the intergenerational work. We don't die, we multiply. Like seeds, we grow when they try to bury us. I want to use the time allocated to lift up the three things that Land Day represents, that have, themes that have already been touched on, but I want to emphasize again. And those three themes are settler colonialism and the centrality of land, to emphasize that this is not about equality. We are not seeking to democratize the settler colony to be equal with Israelis. We are seeking land. We need to free the land. And so that remains a central element in our work. The second theme that's equally as important is to emphasize the indispensability of our Palestinian brothers, sisters, community members who happen to be citizens of Israel, who have been juridically separated, geographically isolated, socially made as other and threat, and rehabilitate their story as Khalid was doing. And so I'm gonna build on what you were saying, Khalid. And then finally, to emphasize this spirit of resistance and the torch that continues on these calls, and as Suhair has recently shared with her own story of facing off against a $6 million lawsuit, which is just atrocious. So with that, I'm going to read. As you can see, I'm wordy, so I'm going to read to try to stay on time, but start by emphasizing that within a settler colonial framework, land is the central organizing principle. And Zionism is driven by a set of twin axioms, two things that work at the same time. The first is to take as much of the land as possible. So it's about the land grab. And the second is about concentrating as many of the native Palestinians as possible onto small plots of land. So it's the taking of the land, it's dispossession, the removal of Palestinians, but also the concentration of Palestinians onto small plots of land, which couldn't be more obvious as it is in the West Bank, where we see areas A, B, and C, how they've been fractured, which by the way is an invention of the peace process. We didn't have checkpoints in these areas before Oslo. They were produced by Oslo, and they have become the non-contiguous Bantustans that represent have become such a forceful feature of Palestinian life. But the biggest Bantustan, obviously, we know is the Gaza Strip, our 305 square meters, where Palestinians are concentrated further and further during the assaults on Gaza during between 2008 and 2014, the large-scale offensives, not the March of Return. That buffer zone of Gaza was increased by 40%, further concentrating the Palestinians as part of a land grab under a security framework. And we see that even continuing to this day in the taking even of the sea. Even of the Mediterranean coastline is being taken. So not only the land, but the sea that borders it, where Israel is now entering into new contracts for the extraction of natural gas that they are selling to European partners and then selling back to Palestinians, which in Gaza, which emphasizes that this is not about the security framework, but this is about maintaining Palestinians under perpetual dependence and domination. And so we see throughout, without distinction to jurisdiction or geography, Palestinians are subject to these processes of dispossession, removal, and concentration. And Palestinians who are citizens of Israel are no different. Yet despite that, for many years, it's our Palestinian citizens who, as somebody emphasized to me, even as I was writing my own book and almost didn't have a chapter on our communities within, that I too had forgotten these Palestinians. We see in most of the literature, legal scholarship, historiography, what ends up being written is a story about 1948 and then a story about 1967. And yet between 48 and 67, we see the very models, legal technologies, the violences that are then now ongoing, and what we see in the West Bank and Gaza perfected and perpetuated against the Palestinians who remained, approximately 160,000 from an original million Palestinians who were there. We have obviously literature that's filled that gap, from Maha Nassar and her wonderful work, Brothers Apart, and Shira Robinson's work, Citizen Strangers. We also hear about them. I think Edward Said does this wonderfully in his memoir, Out of Place, when he writes about this distrust that we have of our Palestinian, not only a distrust, but really we don't know them, because they become isolated. They can't travel to the Arab world because there is a boycott. There was an Arab boycott of Israel, and so they can't travel. They don't have that relationship. And so he writes, as recently as the early 1970s, I can recall Israeli Palestinians were considered a special breed, someone you might easily be suspicious of if you were a member of the exile or a refugee Palestinian population residing outside Israel. We always felt that Israel's stamp on these people, their passports, their knowledge of Hebrew, their comparative lack of self-consciousness about living with Israeli Jews, their references to Israel as a real country rather than the Zionist entity, had changed them. And so this was a reality. And when Oslo gets signed, the PLO leadership makes the exclusion and the excision of our Palestinian citizens from within official, because they definitely don't represent them anymore in any of their negotiations, in any of the elections, or in any other political processes. They are not even represented by the liberation organization that should represent us as a result of Oslo, which obviously was detrimental on multiple counts. So what is it that happens to our Palestinian communities within? And I just want to emphasize, the reason this is on my mind is because I also try to help many friends from within who are discriminated against as a matter of law, who are racially subordinated, who are considered as internal threats, who are shot to be killed, as the 6 Palestinian Israelis were shot to be killed in 1976, who continue to be targeted in so many ways. They're not regarded even by external entities as other Palestinians are. You'll be very, very hard pressed to find a scholarship for Palestinians that they're even eligible for. So this exclusion has detrimental effects. And so that's why I'm making it a point to rehearse this history. But upon establishing a truce in March 1949 with the warring Arab countries, David Ben-Gurion Israel's first act of government was to impose Britain's martial law regime that was imposed on Palestinians to quell the Great Revolt from 1936 to 1939. It was imposed verbatim, with few exceptions, on Palestinians who remained only. Those Palestinians were, once they were granted citizenship, were subjugated as a matter of law, because what happens is a bifurcation or a split between the offering of Israeli citizenship and the offering of nationality, which is limited to Jews. It is through the national rights that are available only to Jews in a reciprocal relationship with Jews all over the world, regardless of their territorial relationship to the land, right? It is through this gateway that rights are afforded within the state, whether it be in housing, education, access to land, whether it be in access to medicine, access to water, connectivity to electricity grids. All of the discriminatory mechanisms through the law flowed through Jewish nationality, so that you can have, on the face of it, Palestinians who are touted as equal citizens and yet are being subjugated as a matter of law because they are denied Jewish nationality, which they don't aspire to, but this is the way that the law also embeds its violence in order to oppress. But in 1949, Ben-Gurion, after the cessation of hostilities with Arab countries, reviewed the application of martial law on the Palestinian citizens to see whether or not it was necessary. Initially, it was said it was necessary because they might be the threat within. Later, after the cessation of hostilities, Ben-Gurion military commission determines you no longer need this in order to protect Israel as a nascent country, as a nascent entity. And yet Ben-Gurion insisted on keeping it because, quote, it was not subject to the rules of normal procedure, and it would facilitate a massive population transfer of those Palestinians who remained. Quote, the military regime came into existence to protect the Jewish settlement in all parts of the state. And this happened in meticulous order through a language of law. In 1950, the government passed a law that made the expropriation of the lands and properties a condition with the absentee property law. Now, the absentee property law not only declared the refugees who refused the right to return as absent and therefore disqualified from claiming their lands, but this is the same law that declares the Palestinians who are within as present absentees. They are there and not there. They are incorporated within the law only to be subjugated, to be oppressed by that very same law. Later, there was a law that was cultivation of wastelands that was military order, enabled the military to declare any Palestinian lands as waste in order to confiscate them. In 1953, the land acquisition law retroactively legalized these land expropriations. And in 1960, Israel enacted legislation that prohibited Palestinians from, quote, owning, leasing, or working on 97% of state-held land. These regulations, together with a series of land laws, dispossess Palestinians, refugees, as well as those who remained within the state of their homes, their businesses, approximately 2 million acres of cultivable land. Between Israel's establishment in 1948 and 1953, 350 of the 370 new Jewish settlements were built on land owned by Palestinians. And by 1954, more than 1/3 of Israel's Jewish population lived or worked on Arab absentee property, right? But it's not only the land confiscation of Palestinians, it's also their concentration of those Palestinians who remained. Considered, Israel continues to deem the Palestinians within as a threat, and so has geographically concentrated the remaining Palestinian population within its borders to prevent national cohesion and the threat of rebellion. And it's done that through, again, a series of laws. I'll only mention a few of them. Consider that today, almost half, or 46% of all of Israel's Palestinian citizens live in the northern Jalil. 71% of all Palestinians live in 116 localities where they comprise nearly the entire population. 24% live in 8 mixed localities. 1% live in Jewish locations, while 4%, namely the Bedouin populations, live in unrecognized villages. That means they are not recognized by the state, even though they precede its establishment, and are denied electricity, water, education, municipal funding in order for them to continue to remain dominated, not a threat, and ultimately to leave. But this happens also in Major, the most significant Palestinian city within Israel is Nazareth. It's the home to the largest concentration of Palestinian, it's the largest city and home to 80,000 Palestinian citizens. They're denied the right because bidding rights for public building opportunities are reserved for citizens who have completed military service. So notice how this works. They don't say for Jewish nationals, they don't say for Jews only, but they say you must have completed military service, which Palestinians do not complete. Obviously, there's exceptions with the fragmentation of Palestinians, Druze, Bedouin, otherwise, but on the whole, they don't serve. So this becomes a proxy for discrimination. And it ends up excluding nearly all of Nazareth's Palestinians who did not serve and will not serve in the Israeli military. Palestinians in Nazareth are effectively rendered ineligible for urban development designated within the municipality's borders, and only Jewish nationals are able to live in those areas designated for public bidding opportunities, further entrenching the concentration of Palestinians while separating them from one another. If you visit Nazareth today, you know that one of the largest settlements is Nazaret Elite, or Upper Nazareth, and a settlement, a city literally built atop Nazareth, as the Palestinians who live there are concentrated, cannot expand even for natural population growth, and end up being surveilled by these hilltop settlements, not just in Jerusalem, not just in El-Khalil, but also in a Nasra. There's other ways where even when the Israeli Supreme Court, and if any of you study law, you know how the US Legal Academy likes to exalt the Israeli Supreme Court as a liberal exemplar, and yet it is constantly filled with loopholes. For example, it passed a law that made it illegal to exclude Palestinians from agricultural communities in towns. But in 2011, the Knesset passed the law to amend the Cooperative Societies Ordinance, or the Admissions Committee law, which then allows Admissions Committee to exclude residents based on something called social suitability, thereby exporting its discrimination that would otherwise be done by the state to individuals and individual communities, the same way that the Jewish National Fund has done as a parastatal organization on behalf of the state. So I am going to just end with one response about what happens in response to the 2011 Knesset amendment, when the Jewish Agency chairman at the time, Salai Meridor, said, and this goes back to the point about land inequality. He explained the security rationale underpinning the concentration and the segregation. And segregation is key here because that is a key element in apartheid. In the 1973 law, treaty that declares apartheid as a crime against humanity. And Meridor says the main issue is not equality. We're all for equality. The question is how we ensure equality while we're also making sure that areas with a massive Arab majority near the territory of an emerging Palestinian entity, meaning everywhere else, Gaza and the West Bank, and including Jerusalem, will remain part of the state of Israel. Along with equality, Israel must safeguard its national and security interests. So I'm going to end here because what this emphasizes for us is that Israelis are not afraid of equality for Palestinians, because they understand full well that you can have a nation of equals that continues to subjugate Palestinians much more sophisticatedly and much less harshly and explicitly than Israel does today. Not that its government really cares, but should it decide to do that, should its liberal wings prevail, it can do that, much in the same way that the US has called itself a democracy, even as it continues to subjugate our Black American communities and continues to kill with impunity with state-sanctioned violence by vigilantes or law enforcement itself, in the same way that the US continues to expand its settler colonial holdings of our native brethren within this entity. So too can Israel advance itself in order to do that work, even if it's on its face it appears liberal. So we must remain vigilant. We must free the land. And so with that, I'll end and turn it over to, I think it's going to turn over to Mohammed, who's going to tell us about that ongoing struggle within his own community, his family's struggle in Sheikh Jarrah.
Thank you, Noura. Actually, I was just going to introduce Mohammed, and I really want to thank you. And it is really sad that we live here in America, where settler colonialism took its effect for a long time, and now our country, unfortunately, is helping and abetting another state that is doing the same thing, like the same, practicing the same, or even probably more on Palestinians, the same that was done here. And of course, we need people like you and many, and for us to remain strong, resilient, and not relent at all. So thank you, Noura. And so Mohammed El-Kurd, like you mentioned, Noura, Mohammed El-Kurd is a writer from Jerusalem, occupied Palestine. His family continues to battle settler colonialism in Sheikh Jarrah since 1972. Recently, the Israeli authorities ruled in favor of settler organizations to take over their home, among others, by May 2nd, forcibly displacing 127 individuals and rendering them homeless. So I welcome Mohammed El-Kurd.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much all for having me. It's such an honor to be here among such amazing people. And thank you, Al-Awda. It's particularly a joy to be here with Noura because I'm such a huge fan of your work and I love reading your writings. And I know you know my community really well. And sometimes when I'm writing about my community, I even look for your writing to find the legal jargon that I need. I don't know if you remember, there's a piece you wrote about my grandmother maybe 10, 12 years ago that I still cite to this day. Which brings me to what I want to speak about today. You know, I was born and raised in Sheikh Jarrah, Jerusalem, and I'm sure a lot of you watching know and have been hearing about it in the media these past few weeks. Us in Sheikh Jarrah, we are 28 homes, and our neighborhood was created as a housing project by the Jordanian government and the UNRWA. And after the Nakba in 1948, all of us were displaced brutally by Zionist gangs from all over Palestine. My grandmother, for example, from Haifa, and we found our way to Jerusalem. And in 1956, we were granted these homes in Sheikh Jarrah. And since 1972, and particularly after Israel's illegal occupation of Jerusalem, we have been in a tumultuous, quote unquote, legal battle with billionaire-backed settler organizations trying to take over our lands and our homes. And they have been successful. They have been successful 4.5 times. The first time they were successful was in 1967 when they squatted without a court or trial. They squatted in a shanty home and have been squatting there ever since. In 2008, they took Fawzia El-Kurd's house and Ghawi and Hanoun's house, displacing dozens and dozens of people and children, and, you know, tearing our community apart. And then the half was actually half of our home, of my very own home in 2009. Settlers, I will never forget settlers, you know, thieves, really. Thieves backed with army and police came and took over half of our home, and they called it their own, even though that half was actually closed and we were paying fines and fines and fines because it was made without a permit. But as you know, Palestinians in Jerusalem, in the eastern parts of Jerusalem, have a really, really hard time obtaining building permits by the Israeli municipality and by the Israeli regime. I think the rate is 95% rejection rate, if not more. So my father didn't bother apply for a building permit. He built the extension to our house like anybody else in the city. And then they took over the house 9 years later after we had paid hundreds of thousands of shekels in fines. What was startling about that case, and what's particularly kind of, funny to think about, is that not only did they take over the house that was closed for being built without authorization, but they also claimed that they built it themselves, which was kind of startling because we were in the court for 9 years because we built it without legal authorization. Today, Sheikh Jarrah looks much, much starker. 12 homes face eviction, my family being one of them, on May 2nd, which is in 29 days. We are likely to see a plethora of soldiers, policemen, settlers, like I said, thieves, coming over, wielding rifles and throwing us into the street. It's a scary thought to think about, but what's really scary and also what's really illuminating is understanding my context and my placement and my positionality in this. I grew up hearing about the Nakba, and I was actually born on the 50th anniversary of the Nakba, so it's always been a particular special anniversary for me. But we didn't need to hear stories about Al-Nakba. We literally saw it every single day happen to us. And to understand what's going on to Sheikh Jarrah, you must understand the context of Al-Nakba itself. Because what's going on right now is not a bunch of legal battles between us and the state of Israel. What's going on right now is exactly what happened in 1948, which is many, many, many billionaire-backed settler organization claiming lands with forged documents and in collusion with the Israeli regime all over Jerusalem, not just in Sheikh Jarrah. So for example, next door in the neighborhood of Silwan, there are 100 homes, 100 homes with over 1,500 inhabitants that were slotted to be demolished in the coming months. So what we're looking at right now is ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem at large. And this is This is not a conspiracy theory. This is something you can easily obtain by looking at the Israeli municipality urban plans, be it Jerusalem 2000 or Jerusalem 2020 or Jerusalem 2030. If you look at the maps, Sheikh Jarrah is no longer there. If you look at the future maps, Silwan is no longer there. This is a long, well-documented process of them claiming lands and dispossessing Palestinians from Jerusalem in various ways, one of which is forging documents and claiming land ownership prior to 1948, but also by saying that this particular slot of land is a military zone, and so you have to be thrown out of your home, or saying that, oh, we're going to take over this town because we're going to turn it into a sanctuary or into some green land. All of these excuses are just ways in which the Israeli occupation does to exterminate us from Jerusalem. And when I say exterminate us, I mean it, because Jerusalem is an increasingly gentrified city. It is more and more expensive, and we cannot afford to live in it anymore. We do not get paid Israeli wages. So when you are rendered homeless in the street at the hands of Israeli machinery, you cannot rent to live in Jerusalem. So you have to leave and live in the West Bank. And if you live in the West Bank, your center of life, which is what Israelis call center of life, is no longer Jerusalem. And so you lose your Jerusalem residency. You lose your ability to enter Jerusalem ever again. So it's really stark thinking about Sheikh Jarrah, because I know that our Nakba is right now. Not only has our Nakba been continuous and ongoing, but so many of us have experienced it more than once. I am so young and I've already been dispossessed. This would be my second time. On my second, my father was dispossessed in 1948, 1967, 2009, and in the upcoming May 2nd, 2021. And it's also important to note, I think Noura did an amazing job, so I'll be very brief in this, but it's also important to note that we are being taken to court by our own occupation. And our own occupation has very clear goals to annex our lands, to throw us out of our homes. So we are going to a settler court, asking a settler judge to stand with us against settlements. So the system is quite literally set up by settlers and for settlers to ethnically cleanse us, to displace us, to dispossess us, so that we no longer have a place to stay in our native city. I also want to say that although this has been very stark and very stressful, and anticipating the coming days and hoping for a miracle, we've also seen such an amazing effort on behalf of so many Palestinians in Palestine, in historic Palestine, and outside in the diaspora. We have launched a Save Sheikh Jarrah campaign under the hashtag Save Sheikh Jarrah in both Arabic and English, and the response has been phenomenal. I want to point to the petition that Al-Awda has so kindly created for us. So please take a minute. I think they're going to drop it in the chat, but please take a minute to sign the petition that Al-Awda created against ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem, and particularly in Sheikh Jarrah, and take a minute to use that petition and use a template to write to your Congress people. We need you more than ever to speak out, because the Nakba is now. When you think about what you would have done in 1948, you could do it now. When you think about those things, because I know that me and my family and my loved ones in Sheikh Jarrah do not want to be commemorated in museums. We do not want to be remembered in history books. We want people to show up for us now. We don't want to be mourned. We want to live. So thank you.
Mohammed, that was really beautiful. And I think that that's right. This move to, museumify Palestinians as if we were, something to be held in place and remembered, and not an ongoing. And, we have our own language for settler colonialism in the course of an ongoing Nakba, which your story very much illuminates. It would be great, I think, for you to share with us also just the story of the matriarch, the heart and soul of your family. If you can tell us a little bit about Rifqa, El-Kurd, Allah yarhamha. You wrote a beautiful piece recently in The Nation and a poem for her. If you wanted to share with us some of that and emphasize her role especially at a time when there is, you know, a Palestine feminist movement that is also organic to our movement and not external, as exemplified by your grandma and many of our grandmamas.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and thank you for, I didn't expect you to ask about my grandmother. I really appreciate it. So yeah, my grandmother Rifqa is my entire world, because I grew up and she was the channel through which I saw, she was a channel through which I understood my history and through which I understood Palestine, because as you know, the vocabulary in which Palestinians are discussed and depicted is not necessarily the vocabulary that we choose to talk about ourselves. So seeing the chasm between,
أعطيني والله السيجارة من عندك.
شو يعني؟ لا بس نفل.
Seeing the chasm between my grandmother's oration of her own history and her own tragedies and what she'd endured and what she hopes for, and seeing the bluntness in which she would go up to a Israeli soldier, Israeli police officer, and say, your law is fake, your country is fake, all of those things. This is a rhetoric that was completely erased, as well as a rhetoric of Palestinian women resistors that we don't often hear about, neither in Western media nor in Arabic media, to be completely honest. My grandmother passed away this past year at 103 years old, and this is also a rough estimation. She could have been a little bit older. We don't really know. You know, our elderly are all born on like the 1st of January of the same year, and I've always just looked through her to understand my history, and this became very evident when she died, because the entirety of Jerusalem mourned her. People hailed her as Palestine's jasmine tree, because she really loved jasmines, but also because she died like the trees, you know, standing. I can recall so much of her amazing wit. I can recall so much of her amazing rhetoric. I'll say one thing that I really, I'll give you one story that I really think is timely today. Every single time my grandmother would have a visitor from the United States, she would very funnily look at them and be like, you are the reason. And, you know, it's kind of dramatic, but it's true. And I think we need more of that finger pointing. I know we need more instigators in our movement. We need more and more dissenters in our movement, people who are able to look power in the eye and say, you are the reason, without fearing for repercussions. I've been hearing so much about this rhetoric of difficult conversations, and I can believe and justify that there are difficult conversations, but no matter the difficulty of the conversation, it will never be as difficult as living under settler colonialism and occupation. So if people are going to take something away from my grandmother, please dissent, and please say it loudly and proudly.
Akid, in her legacy, we need to be instigators. Muhammad, she said it to me.
Really?
She said it to me. You know, and you too, obviously, we pay taxes here, and to the delegations that we brought, you know, and it's very taxing, and part of an exploitative process where Palestinians are constantly asked to perform their pain for people who come on delegations, and, you know, to go back and to not do anything. We are responsible. We are not third party. We're not an audience. We are players. So, and we are also very unique for the Palestinian diaspora in the United States. Most of us live in the majority of Palestinians live in diaspora. And so I want to ask you, as someone who grew up in this situation and is now, you're in the United States, but I would say that you now have a transnational existence. You're neither here nor there. You live transnationally. So what are the insights that you can provide for us? I mean, you could take this question wherever you want, but, you know, things that I would find interesting, for example, is how is the discourse of how we talk about Palestine different here from, you know, home, right? Another home, right? I know that anyways, I'll let you answer that question, but just to expound a little bit about this transnational existence where you're both responsible and you're victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's a very difficult question. I'll say the most interesting thing about living in both of those places is the stark difference in language. In Palestine, in Jerusalem particularly, we do not recognize the Israeli courts, for example, even though we go to them because we have to. but we call them occupation courts. We don't go around saying, you know, the Israeli District Court or the Israeli Supreme Court. At the end of the day, it's the occupation court. So I think here in the United States, and I don't think this is something to blame Palestinian diasporans for instance, but I think we have been kind of bullied into becoming more and more muzzled in the way we talk about Palestine, and our vocabulary has lessened and lessened in its denunciation of the Israeli occupation. So this is one thing that actually quite frustrates me living here in the United States, because often my lived experience does not match the language that I see written about me or the language that my editors, when I'm getting published, like, you know, redline for me. That is one of the things, but also being here, I must admit, is a privilege, especially being here as a person from Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah is by no means a unique case in Palestine. The entire country has been swallowed whole by the Zionist regime, the entire country. It just so happens that I speak English, and I happen to be in the United States, and I'm positioned in a way that I could speak about my neighborhood. So I definitely do see the privilege and the responsibility of being able to speak about this, of being able to reach a wider audience. And it's really hard. It's really, really hard. It's really hard for me to think about myself as an activist. I don't necessarily think of myself as an activist. I think of myself as somebody who has a sword to their neck. And when you have a sword to your neck, you have to scream. There's nothing else you can do. This work is exhausting, particularly being one of the only people working on the, well, not anymore because of all the people helping me and all the great people, you know, I don't want to discredit anyone, but for the longest time, for the past 12 years, it has been exhausting because it feels as though I'm the only one speaking about this, about Sheikh Jarrah from a position of like authority, but not really, from a position of knowledge, but not really, because I have to, you know, convince people of my credibility, even though I lived this experience. And I do think, you know, here in the United States, I have leverage to say much more that I could say under the Israeli regime. So again, it brings me back to the very first point, is those of us who are here, I understand the risks of losing our jobs, of, you know, pissing off our coworkers, but we have so much more leverage to speak here. I understand the Zionist lobby is strong, and I understand the recent developments with the anti-Semitism definition is like a scary development. And I'm seeing it even at my own college where I'm getting my master's degree play, but it's also still easier to speak here than there. So I still urge people to dissent and make it unabashed, make it very clear, and like make it in correspondence with the people organizing on the ground in Palestine, make it in correspondence with the organizations working right now in Palestine, and make sure we all engage with those organizations at all times and make sure our discourse matches theirs. We don't want to engage Palestinians in Palestine as if we are saviors and they are drowning. We want to engage Palestinians in Palestine as though they are creating a rhetoric for us, and we are working together with them to give that rhetoric power and speak truth to power.
Yes, I mean, that's absolutely powerful. We must speak truth to power. We must be dissenters. We must be instigators. And thank you for embodying that spirit, continuing that fight, and encouraging us to do it. We're all here to also support. So this is a good place to wrap up, but I do want to emphasize again, the Take Action. Charlotte Cates has posted this to the panelists. There is a letter that you can sign. We can support. We can be part of the solution. It's Sheikh Jarrah. It's Al-Hiran. It's Khan Al-Ahmar. It's the Naqab. It's Yafa. Right? It's Wadi al-Urdun, or the Jordan Valley. All of our lands are besieged and subject to this ethnic cleansing. And so we should not concede even an inch. Thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. You know, your story really breaks our heart. You know, for us here, unable really to help you, and knowing how powerful, you know, the Zionist forces, you know, there are I mean, I call here, you know, we're about 70 people, and I call out to all of us, you know, with any help you can. I think, Mohammed, if you can share your contacts for people to connect with you. So I want to thank you, you know, for you being there on the ground, fighting for all of us. And I also want to thank Noura here for fighting for your rights here in the United States. I think, you know, we can probably continue questions and answers after the film. So now we move into our next segment of the event, and this is a film. I'm just going to read a quick synopsis, you know, about the film. It's the name of the film is Hummus, A Story of Appropriation. In one of the world's oldest cities, an ancient identity has been under threat for almost a century. Violence and discrimination has consumed the narrow streets of East Jerusalem, and this film seeks to document a Palestinian population's lives, struggling to hold onto what little identity they have left. Samer, a young Jerusalemite, tries to maintain his presence in the city despite the Israeli government's efforts to expel him. Abu Falah is an Asian blacksmith who is constantly harassed into vacating his shop in the old city. Hummus is a metaphor for a Palestinian identity that is constantly under the threat of being hijacked. Hummus, A Story of Appropriation. And even though Hummus in the story, A Story of Appropriation, is about much more than the mere cultural appropriation of the beloved culinary staples. It is emblematic of the Palestinians' loss of land, of dignity, and ultimately their very identity, set against the backdrop of the Israeli appropriation of hummus and as quintessential to Israeli cuisine. Palestinian-American filmmaker Lafi Abood captures ordinary Palestinians' lives in Jerusalem. Abu Falah, an Asian blacksmith who is under constant threat of eviction, he is nowhere else to go. Samer, a young Palestinian with his big dreams, finds his life's plans getting truncated through a dreadful sequence of repeated.
Thank you so much to Lafi Abood for giving us this incredible film today and for being present with us to have this conversation. Now, I also want to say that we have a very special surprise as part of the program today, which is that Samer Hussam, whose story you have just seen so vividly and brilliantly portrayed in this film, is actually with us today as a special guest and will be joining Lafi as well for the Q&A portion of today's event. And we know that it's everything that we've heard today has been so impactful, so powerful, and so meaningful. And we also know that we have quite a significant program on the agenda today. So we'll be having a relatively short Q&A session where we give time and space to hear from Lafi and to hear from Samer about their thoughts and some background on the film we've just seen and the stories that fed into it. My name is Charlotte Cates. I'm a member of Al-Awda's National Board. I'm also the international coordinator of Samidun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network. And so it was very meaningful to see the attention and kind of brilliant, sensitive, and very human portrayal given to the story and the cause of Palestinian political prisoners within this film. So really just a huge thank you for creating this piece of Palestinian art and Palestinian cultural resistance. And now I'd like to turn to Lafi and turn to Samer and welcome both of you, invite you to speak, to turn on your microphones, and to ask you a little bit more, to learn a bit more about the film, the background of the film, and the ideas, concepts, and experiences that informed its development. So, to begin with, this film uses hummus as a metaphor, and it uses hummus as a metaphor for colonization, appropriation, dispossession, imprisonment, and the kind of really broad range of ongoing Nakba that we've also been hearing about today from all of our speakers, as well as this ongoing Palestinian existence, resistance, and reality that has not been erased through, despite 100 years of Zionist colonization and 72 years of Israeli occupation. So with that being said, why and how did you choose the framework of hummus as a metaphor in the process of developing the film? Especially because, as you say, the film is not about hummus. And so this question is for you, Lafi, and for Samer. I'd like to ask you what you think about the metaphor of hummus and what you think of, and how you think this relates to your experience as a Palestinian Jerusalemite, fighting for and always retaining your human dignity despite a system that is doing everything it can to try to strip it from you.
Hi, Charlotte. Thanks again for having me here. I think Samer's having a little bit of difficulty, so I'm just going to speak for him if it's possible. I mean, as far as hummus goes, living in the US and you go to the supermarket and the first thing you see is Israeli hummus. And that's like a constant thing over and over and over. Israeli hummus, Israeli this, Israeli falafel, Israeli I don't know what. So that's where the idea originally came from. But to be honest with you, when we set out to do this film, we were really thinking of Black comedy. We just wanted to make a film on how ridiculous the situation is. Palestinian people living with their jailers, basically, in a small piece of land that they cannot get out even unless they relinquish everything that they have. And that's how it all started. And then as we started making this film, that the notion of making it laughable became strange. So we had to like shift gear and go the other way. And that all changed really when I met Samer and I interviewed him the first time, and I realized, wow, you know what? We can't just do this. We really have to tell the bigger story about everybody that is here in Jerusalem. And then we met Abu Falah, and we all know how sad that story turned out. And it just shifted again. Honestly, we edited and re-edited this film about 14 times. My editor is on, by the way, Mehdi, thank you. And the editor and I just kept going back again and back again and back again, trying to come up with something that actually do the people justice. And we ended up with this.
Well, thank you so much for creating this. I think everyone who was a part of watching this film today has really felt the power of your words, of Samer's words, and even if he's not available to speak right now, I do want to say that on behalf of Al-Awda, on behalf of all of us, it's a huge honor to be in his presence. And his story is one that many of us, campaigned about and signed and wrote petitions about years ago when it was taking place. And so it's wonderful to see it kind of brought to the big screen in a film like this. And so in that context, how has the reception been for this film so far? Is it reaching festivals? Is it reaching broader audiences? And we've received a lot of questions from people who would also like to screen the film, who would like to show it. What are the plans to make it available for rental, screening, distribution, etc.?
I mean, as far as film festivals goes, so of course, as a filmmaker, you always want to go for the bigger film festivals right away, because that makes, perfect sense. So, and it was pretty much not given a platform at all with most of the big film festivals. So, you start with the second tier festivals, which is mostly indie festivals. And with indie festivals, it did really, really well. Like it won bunch of prizes, a lot of recognitions. Every time it showed in a film festival, it did something, be it jury award or jury mention or just flat out wins it. So, I mean, that's good for me. That's good as a filmmaker. That's a great thing that people are seeing it. And it's being shown all over the world. It's being shown in places that, you know, I wouldn't have even thought about, like just showing next week in Venezuela, and it was in South Africa, and it's in Nigeria, and it's Turkey. So it's good. I mean, and for me as a filmmaker, the wider audience that we have is the better the message is delivered. So having said that, it would have been nice if it was shown in the big festivals. I mean, you know, because that's what you want. But I'm happy. I'm happy with the results. There is a distributor for North America, and soon it will be distributed in North America, like US and Canada, and we're negotiating for Europe and the Middle East. We'll see. I mean, but this, you know, again, this film is really, it's more about telling the Palestinian story rather than anything else. So I'm happy either way, really. I'm really happy. I would have been even happier that the whole world has seen it. I'm good with that. And I just want to say something. I want to talk about Samer, because I know he probably can hear us. Samer is my hero, by the way. And if it wasn't for Samer, none of this would have happened. He's the guy that actually, you know, put the whole idea in my head. This is the guy that motivated me. His story kind of pushed everything possible inside of me to finish it. And I just want to say thanks, man. Thank you, Samer. Really, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you, brother. And I would like to thank everybody else that participated and helped in this film. This wasn't my film, by the way. This was a group of people's film. There's a lot of camera guys that helped out, a lot of filmmakers that helped out. You know, everybody that put effort in this film. You know, I appreciate you guys all. And they didn't have to, they didn't need to, you know, they just did it because they believed in, you know, telling this story, you know, especially about Jerusalem, which you don't hear a lot of stories about. I mean, Palestinian filmmakers are doing a great job in this day and age. They really are. And, you know, special shout out to Farah Nabulsi and her film, The Present. If you guys haven't seen it, it's a must. You have to see it. And, you know, reaching the Oscars is something that, you know, as a Palestinian filmmaker, is just an honor for all of us. And again, if you haven't seen that film, you really have to see it.
Thank you so much. Now, in terms of Samer and his story and his case, you know, this was something that was really a driving force in the film. And I think all of us felt that and saw that as we were watching the film and as we were listening to his story and watching everything that was taking place. In the images of his release also were very reminiscent of some recent images from Jerusalem, which I think a lot of people have seen online when Majd Barbar, who had been imprisoned for 20 years, was released to his family, to his wife Fatima, to his son Muntasser, who was only 2 years old when he was taken away 20 years ago, and his daughter Zaina, who was only 15 days old when her father was taken away. And their kind of joyous scenes of celebration and reunion were being shared by Palestinians and also by friends of Palestine around the world. And this evoked kind of such anger in the Israeli occupation that they came to his home, stormed his home, attacked his family gathering with tear gas and rubber-coated metal bullets, injuring 12 people, taking Majd away. But as he was taken away, he declared, you know, we will not be defeated. And he was released the next morning, refusing Israeli conditions. And so the images of Samer leaving Israeli detention and returning home to his friends and his family and his city that could not be taken from him, you know, it had that same kind of impact and power. And I wondered if you would like, if Samer is available, or if he is not, if you would like to tell us more about his case and about, you know, what's happening now, and what we should all know about the situation and the story that has been portrayed so powerfully in the film.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. We didn't really discuss his case in the film for many reasons. One of them is it doesn't matter what Palestinians are imprisoned for. It's all ridiculous anyways. And we didn't want to concentrate on that just because it defeats the purpose. It's just, you know, you could be arrested for anything and everything. So that's not even, you know, that's not something that we wanted to discuss. And so that's why we left it aside. I mean, I don't want to go into it, but it was ridiculous. And it's not once or twice or three times. Samer's been arrested many, many times. But that's the story of every Palestinian living in Jerusalem, you know, all these kids. I mean, you heard it from him. You know, it becomes like, you know, just go back to prison just to say hi to everybody that you haven't seen in a while. And as far as going out of prison, leaving prison, so when the guys come and take you away, that's called zeffe. And it's just as the same zeffe as we do when you get married, you know? So, and that's an important thing. And the Israelis hate nothing more than that, you know, to a point where even they make a lot of the guys sign before they leave not to have such a thing, you know? Zeffe is a very important thing for us. And there's another thing as well. Worth mentioning is when these guys get arrested, if you look at any image of a Palestinian in Jerusalem getting arrested, you see a smile on their face, you know? And that's like another thing that they also hate, you know? They don't give them that satisfaction of feeling bad or scared or angry. They all smile, you know? And it's, for me, that was a powerful thing. I've seen it, and the audience have seen it tonight. And it's something I so respect. I really, really do.
Well, thank you so much. And one of the things, you know, one of those kind of recurrent themes that kept coming through in the film was this idea of this, you know, colonial, apartheid, settler, illegitimate law, a legal regime that was fundamentally itself illegitimate, and how that conflicts with justice. And that came up again and again and again. And of course, this is the same thing that we're also seeing now in the case of Sheikh Jarrah, and that has been the case for the entirety of Zionist settler colonial law, which is built on and based on the eradication, dispossession, and denial of right to return for Palestinians for over 72 years. And of course, you know, Samer's words in the film, "We are not leaving," it has been something that is, you know, really continues to express Palestinians' own determination, and really speaks to why it's so important for people around the world, and especially in the United States, which is providing Israel with so much military, diplomatic, and economic support, to take a stand, to try to stand with Palestinians and stop this injustice that's taking place. So I wanted to close by asking you, you know, one last question, you know, to comment on your experiences and your feelings and your views on the isolation, fragmentation, and targeting of Jerusalem by the Zionist occupation, and how Palestinians, even those who are within walking or driving distance from Jerusalem, are being kept away from their own capital city, and from even beyond this political concept of the capital city, this you know, center of Palestinian life that has been such for centuries and millennia. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts on Jerusalem and beyond what was in the film, and what we should be keeping in mind today about these stories that are continuing to take place on a daily basis.
I mean, the first thing I would like to say is they need a lot of support. Palestinians in Jerusalem need a lot of support. For me, Palestinians in Jerusalem are the first line of defense. and they always have and probably always will be. And if this first line of defense crumbles, honestly, I don't think we have a chance. So the support that they have must be a lot better than it is right now. You know, people in Jerusalem there was always this notion that, oh, they're doing really good, they're doing great, you know, they have health insurance, they have this, they have that. And that's not true, you know. They suffer more than anybody else. And one of the biggest reasons is their enemy is right there. He's in their face day in and day out. You know, you brush against him walking down the street. You know, he lives next door or upstairs. So it's a lot tougher for them, you know, to maintain who they are, to maintain, you know, being a Palestinian in a city, again, that it's forever changing into something different, something that, you know, they don't even recognize, nobody recognizes. So, and that's why, I mean, yes, there is a religious significance for Palestine as, you know, being a Muslim and Al-Aqsa Mosque, or for Christian Palestinians and the churches and all of that. But there's also something else in there, you know. Palestinians in Jerusalem tend to be, and it's something I've never seen anywhere, by the way, they're so tough, like really, really tough and funny at the same time. You know, they're just living their lives and fighting day in and day out, you know, with the simplest things, you know. And, you know, again, they really need a lot of help, you know, and the more help they can get, you know, the better chances they have of maintaining, you know, their identity, maintaining that first line of defense.
Well, thank you so much once again. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for presenting us and sharing this beautiful, powerful piece of Palestinian cultural documentation and Palestinian cultural resistance that is bringing the stories, the struggle, and the very human lived experience of Palestinians in Jerusalem to Palestinians transnationally and to the broader international community. Thank you once again for being with us today. It has been a great honor to present your film and to hear your commentary. Before we close the event, I do want to remind people once again, just to go back to the petition that we shared earlier in the event today. Israel receives $3.8 billion a year from the United States. This is all money that goes to military aid, that goes to fund the guns and tanks and bullets and F-16s that are killing Palestinians, taking Palestinian lives, engaging in extrajudicial execution, stealing Palestinian children, adults, and elders from their homes in night raids, imposing the murderous siege on Gaza, denying Palestinians their right to return. The United States is paying for that, is providing $3.8 billion a year. And so it's so critical, it's so important that we put pressure on members of Congress who have the power to vote no on US aid to Israel, who have the power not just to express disapproval, but to actually put an end to US support to ongoing Zionist expropriation, land confiscation, and denial of Palestinian rights. And so I want to encourage everybody, because it's so important and it's so urgent, to sign the petition to save Sheikh Jarrah, to sign the petition and support Palestinians who are fighting to remain, who are fighting against all forms of oppression, who are fighting against all forms of injustice, from the courts to the military to the border police to the settler agencies that are receiving funds from around the world, including from the United States, where pro-settler organizations are often recognized as 501c3 charities, despite the fact that they're directly engaged in the violation of international law. So please, go to al-awda.org/save Sheikh Jarrah and sign the petition, contact your members of Congress, make it clear and make it known that it's time to end US aid to Israel, and it's time to speak out and stop the expropriation of Palestinian homes. And it's time to put an end to the ongoing Nakba and instead stand with Palestinian human rights. Please, please take action and sign the petition. The forced eviction date for the El-Kurd family and 3 other families has been set as May 2nd. It's April right now. We have this month. So it's time to build up the noise, build up the pressure, build up the resistance to support the incredible steadfastness, resilience, and resistance of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah who are doing everything they can and who have been engaging in this struggle despite everything that they have faced, despite all of the inducements to give up, to protect Palestinian land, to protect Palestinian lives, to protect the heritage, history, and land of Palestine. And so as we're marking Land Day, as we're marking these incredible sacrifices and struggles that we have heard about already from Noura, from Mohammed, from Khalid, as we're also marking the anniversary of the Great March of Return in Gaza, that we have the opportunity to take action to put an end to one of these ongoing crimes that is taking place, and it is taking place with the aid and assistance of US dollars and US unlimited diplomatic and political support for the Israeli occupation. So once again, please take action, please sign the petition. In addition, as you know, Al-Awda is the Palestine Right to Return Coalition. It's in the name. And Palestinians are in exile and diaspora around the world. Palestinians are in exile and diaspora even within occupied Palestine. People who were displaced from their land in 1948 and are forbidden from returning home. There are Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship, just as we heard from Noura earlier today, who are facing displacement and expulsion in the Nakba. There is Palestinian refugees have been keeping the flame of return alive for the past 72 years. But the conditions which Palestinian refugees are continuing the struggle in are really dire and are really critical and have only gotten worse during COVID-19. And so I want to encourage everybody to please support Al-Awda's Refugee Support Fund. Go to alawda.org/support. You can contribute. If you contribute $50, this is enough to provide a food package that can sustain one family for 1 month. Anything can help. Anything can help to sustain those Palestinians who are on the front lines in the camps, keeping the flame of return alive, keeping the hope of return alive, and continuing to live in dignity despite all of the systems that have come together to try to undermine that humanity and that dignity. Before we close, I want to remind everybody that Al-Awda will be holding a future event to commemorate Al-Nakba and to recognize the ongoing and support the ongoing Palestinian struggle for return and liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea. If you're not already a member of Al-Awda, if you're not already a member of our email list, please visit our website, sign up, join Al-Awda, join our email list, get involved. And we really want to see everyone once again back to join us here for our event commemorating Al-Nakba. So I'm going to turn to another video as we close out the event. But before I do, I just want to once again encourage everybody to go sign the petition, donate to support Palestinian refugees, and take action in your communities. Things are different, things are difficult now with COVID, with lockdowns, with the fact that in many ways we can't always come together physically the way that we once did. But it's still so important to protest, to engage in creative actions, to build the boycott of Israel, to build the international isolation of Israel, and to make it clear that for those of us in the United States that we can no longer and will no longer stand for the unlimited military, diplomatic, political, and economic support that is being provided to the Israeli occupation to kill and displace and oppress Palestinians, while here in the United States, once again, a settler colony built on the displacement of indigenous people. People are continuing to die and suffer and struggle in poverty without health care, to struggle to afford to pay their bills on a daily basis. this is not a system that we can just allow to continue silently. And the first responsibility that we have is to stand with those who are on the front lines fighting back, just like those Palestinians in Gaza marching to bring down the walls, marching for return, and those Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah who are, in the words of Samer, once again declaring, we are not leaving. And in the words of millions upon millions upon millions of Palestinians inside and outside Palestine saying, we are not leaving and we will return. And in the words of all people of conscience who look at the story of Palestine and see an incredible story of injustice that is being perpetuated and supported by our governments, that it is so critical that we stand up and support Palestinians, support Palestinian resistance, support Palestinian struggle, and stand for justice, freedom, and liberation and land, the return of the land to the people of Palestine. Thank you once again to all of our tremendous speakers for joining us today. Thank you once again to Lafi for sharing your incredible work of art with us. And we'll close out with more brilliant and beautiful Palestinian cultural resistance. Thank you.
راجع لك يا ورد جدادي للدير وقرن الرمان راجع لك للم الحلوة لمتنا تنور الدار وراجع لك يا ورد جدادي للدير وقرن الرمان راجع لك للم الحلوة لمتنا تنور الدار فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا وراح طلع بالعوالي جيبيني أعطيني مجوز أعطيني عالساحة بيك ولاقيني أعطيني مجوز أعطيني عالساحة بيك ولاقيني قالت لي غني يا زين واعتز إنك فلسطين فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا ورافع بالعالي جيبيني رجع لك يا أرض جدادي للدير وقرن الرمان راجع لك للم الحلوة لمتنا تنور الدار فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا فلسطيني أنا ورافع بالعالي جيبيني على دلعونة سألتني يا زين رايح على وين، على دلعونة سألتني يا زين رايح على وين، قلت لها على أرض جدادي والعشق الاسم فلسطين. فلسطيني أنا، فلسطيني أنا، فلسطيني أنا، فلسطيني أنا، ورافعة بالعالي جبيني.
رجعلك يا أرض جدادي لبتلي وطني النار، رجعلك للهم الحلوة لمتنا ننور الدار.
فلسطيني أنا، فلسطيني أنا،